So let's move now from authoritarian China and a zero COVID environment to democratic Taiwan, where Taiwan is learning to live with the virus. In Taiwan, dissatisfaction with the government's COVID performance was one of the factors in the DPP's loss in the midterm elections, and in no small part due to the many cases, the waves of cases that we have seen as a result of loosening restrictions. From your point, from your international viewpoint, how badly has Taiwan been doing, or how well has Taiwan been doing in terms of COVID?
Well, from the perspective of sitting in the United States during this entire pandemic, for the first 2 years, Taiwan was really one of the most outstanding countries in the world, protecting its citizens, contact tracing, preventing the spread of the virus, and did a phenomenal job. What really happened, I think, was not really due to the change in Taiwan's policies, but the change in the virus. The Omicron variant was, it's far more contagious than the prior variants, and I think was really impossible to contain. And I think that the government here, of course, never considered reacting to the virus in the way that the PRC government has reacted to it. So from the perspective of a democratic country that protects the freedoms of its people, you have to balance those interests. How do you protect their health, but also protect their freedoms and Taiwan's democracy? I think people living here have extremely high expectations of their government. I often ask myself whether people here are aware about what is happening in the outside world. Where it was slow was getting access to the vaccines. And that, in my view, was not the fault of the government here. It's very, very difficult to get the vaccines in the early months. And now, of course, it's widely available.
The DPP's strategy to draw China into this local elections didn't increase votes for them. From a US standpoint, did Washington see this local election as a referendum on the DPP's China policy?
Well, I think that anybody who watches Taiwan's election closely knows that its local elections are truly about local issues. People care about things like pedestrian safety and the transportation. Of course, local issues are also important in our elections in the United States, but there are often national issues that are important as well, and are what we call our midterm elections in the United States are sometimes a barometer of where the presidential elections are going. I just don't think that's true in Taiwan. And my sense is that China was not on the ballot here. Policy toward China was not in the forefront of the minds of voters.
Perhaps what the results did prove is that the KMT can still be a viable opposition in Taiwan. Alexander Huang, I interviewed recently, told me that he believed the results show Taiwanese now know there is a cost to defying China. So from his perspective, he did make this about China. I'll quote him. He said, "We believe that KMT will have abundant of talent in national security matters, and it can help Taiwan and defend Taiwan through the troubling coming years." From your knowledge, because you have extensive knowledge of Taiwan and the political parties, do you believe that the KMT can provide a deterrent to China, or are they actually going to use a different strategy?
Well, I think that the KMT, when it was in power, had some official dialogue with China. And they believe that they might be able to restore that dialogue. And they think that through that dialogue, they can maintain peace and stability across the strait. Official dialogue would be good if it is restored. It was Beijing that cut off that dialogue, not the DPP government here. But even if dialogue is restored, that's not going to change the nature, in my view, of the threat that China poses to Taiwan, which is growing. The military threat is growing. The diplomatic and economic coercion against Taiwan is growing. And so the question is then going forward, what is the best way for Taiwan to defend its security? And there's probably quite a bit of actually overlap between the KMT and the DPP. They will highlight their differences in the campaign, but there are, in some areas, ways where I think that actually that fortifying the military, Taiwan's defense, keeping a strong relationship with the United States, trying to gain more friends in the international community, these are things that both parties would do.
Do you, for the international audience, do you think that there's any contradiction in the KMT's position? Because ultimately the KMT believe there is one China. And I guess the DPP position, perhaps the international audience would know that they are so-called pro-independence. So they perhaps believe there's one China, one Taiwan.
I think different members of the KMT would define their positions differently, and probably different members of the DPP would define their position differently. The dialogue here about one China or independence, it's in the eye of the beholder. We know that the DPP's party resolution in 1999 said that the party accepted that Taiwan is an independent sovereign state, and every president of Taiwan has said that Taiwan is an independent sovereign state. It will be interesting going forward whether the candidates who run for president from the KMT explicitly say that there is one China. I'm sure they won't back one country, two systems, which is, of course, Beijing's formula for unification. The very few people in the KMT, I think, support that. But that will be part of the campaign and the ongoing discussion here about what is Taiwan's relationship with China. And I think that there are few people who would run for president, even from the DPP, who would say, oh, Taiwan should declare itself independent legally, should change the constitution. This isn't the view of the DPP any longer.